Okay. Hello and welcome to Mussar with Batya. And yes, I'm still not Batya, but she's with us tonight, guys. I'm really excited. We are starting 2 new books. We are starting Windows to the Soul by Rabbi Michael Bernstein, medical doctor. And we're starting Battle Plans by Rebbetzin Zipporah Heller and Sarah Yoved Rigler. And Miss Batya is going to be teaching the Battle Plans book, and I'm going to be teaching the Windows to the Soul book. And because this parasha has a lot in our Windows to the Soul book, I'm going to get started. I'm going to talk fast, but hopefully clearly. So let me see. One thing I want to try to do for the recording real quick. There we go. Okay. So I don't know if any of you guys have had a chance to read the parasha in Windows for the Soul. We're on parasha Vayera. I'm sorry if I'm slaughtering it. But we have about 15 little vignettes on this parasha. So after reading through the chapter for parasha Vayera, I can see an overwhelming theme that would be the character trait of kindness. It occurred to me that just as when we count the Omer and how we're going through the different parts of the Sephirot, this is the part of Hesed where it meets judgment, and this is the part of Hesed where it meets generosity, and how they connect. That this is what he's I don't know if it's the author or God is showing us in this parasha. We get all these different examples of different kinds of kindness. The first vignette he talks about, he calls it water on the lungs. The first example we're given is that of Hashem showing kindness to Abraham. As you know, Abraham just recovered from his circumcision, yet he still wanted to show hospitality. Our book tells us that Hashem had intentionally made the day too hot and dry so that no one would be traveling. This provided Abraham a break. Yet because Abraham is so much desirous of sharing Hashem with all who cross his path, Hashem gives him the opportunity to still be selfless and show hospitality to the angels. In this section of our book also shows us the immense kindness of visiting those who are sick. The point the author makes is that visiting the sick is not just about mechanically being there, but it is being there and deducing what the sick person needs. Abraham needed to do mitzvot. He wouldn't be happy unless he was practicing selfless hospitality. Allowing him to do so was a great kindness of Hashem that he showed to Abraham. In the second vignette, it's called the in and out policy, and I kind of subtitled it Kindness Without Limits. Our author shows us that Abraham offers the angels a crust of bread, but then serves them a feast for a king. He offered a little, but did a lot. We also see that the very way that Abraham lived was to be open to anyone who crossed his path. His tent had a door on all sides. This shows us that he selflessly gave to all, accepting them for who and what they are, no matter what baggage they carried or where they came from. He thought the angels were idolaters, yet he never recoiled from them. He sought out those in need, and those in need before they ever came near to him. And the openness of his tent meant that nothing was hidden. Not only did he welcome anyone, but he was reluctant to see them leave. Most of us tend to look forward to when our guests will leave and things get back to normal. But for Abraham, having guests was normal. And he greatly shared his personal space with them. or sorry, gratefully shared his personal space with them. He didn't look down on anyone, and he held everyone in high esteem. This is, in fact, the way that Abraham sanctified Hashem's name. He didn't even accept their gratitude. If someone wanted to thank him, he said that they should thank the Creator instead. If someone, this put the person directly into a position of acknowledging Hashem and giving thanks, or to be in the uncomfortable position of being ungrateful. In the third vignette, it's called Direct Notification, and I subtitled it Kindness Through Respect. And it talked about how Abraham had been notified about having a son in a vision from God. But God didn't do that with Sarah. He sent the angel to tell them verbally so that Sarah was told in person. And I thought about that, and I was like, well, God really respected her. He showed her the kind of respect that would be due the mother of the nation of God. So I thought that was really cool. But that shows God's kindness to her by being respectful. The fourth vignette is called A Little Bit of Water, and I called it Balanced Kindness. In this section, we see how Abraham balances his kindness towards his guests and those helping him. This is shown by asking for only the water that was needed. Now, he also went on to explain that the sages thought Abraham should have gotten the water himself, because whatever happened in that luncheon time during that time the three angels were there, those are the exact same things that happened with Israel when God took Israel out of Egypt. And I did not know that was there, but because Abraham sent someone else to bring them water, God used someone else, Moshe, to give the people water. So the fifth vignette is called Two Kinds of Kindness, and I subtitled it Kindness and Generosity. In this section, we are shown that there are two different kinds of kindness: that of giving generously from yourself, and that of recognizing the superior nature and righteousness of another. The author says that in the example being discussed of the couple who made the room of their home for the prophet Samuel, because that's apparently the corresponding story in the Tanakh to this part of this Torah portion, that both of these, there was an argument between, well, did they build the room for him on top of their house, or did they make a room for him in their house? And I guess they're trying to understand how the couple merited, what is it that they merited? And what the author of our book says is both. It's a yes, yes. In other words, if they built the room on top of the house, then they were acknowledging the fact that Samuel was above them, in his level of observance and righteousness and all of that. And if they had made a space for that, built a room in their house, then they're giving out of their own space, their own generosity. So the way he put it was, both of these understandings were applied as the couple gave generously from themselves, and God generously rewarded them. As they added to their home for another, Hashem added to them by giving them a child. So generosity can come from acknowledging someone else's space and from giving of your own. The sixth one is Sodom is squeezed out, and I called this Kindness and Responsibility, and this was really deep. In this section, we learned that it is an Eastern concept that if you save someone's life, you are obligated to that person, in a way, responsible for them for the rest of their life, since you chose to change their destiny by saving them. Our author explains that this shed light on why, out of all the evil cities that have ever existed, these 4 cities had to be destroyed. It had everything to do with Abraham saving them in the previous parasha. Now that Hashem has told Abraham and Sarah that they can expect Isaac, these evil cities had to go so their evil would not forever be connected to Abraham. What this tells me is that in our acts of kindness, we need to be wise and recognize our responsibility. Weigh the consequences and make sure that your act of kindness doesn't put a noose around your neck, because you are responsible for what you show, who you show kindness to. That is not a perspective I've ever had before. In vignette number 7, Lot seeks refuge, and I put this kindness and free will. In this section, we are shown how even though Hashem intended to save Lot both physically and spiritually, Hashem has given us free will, and we can choose if we want to be saved or not. Lot chose to only be saved physically. Think about that for a minute. How many times do we think about just our physical need and not our spiritual need? To me, I was like, wow, God was opening up a whole bunch of stuff to him, and he only wanted a little. That was deep. In section 8, it says the dangerous salt of Sodom, and I subtitled this kindness to yourself. In this section, we learned that that selfishness leads to spiritual blindness. The salt of Sodom could blind a person. Therefore, we are directed by the Talmud to wash our hands after eating. Knowing that a person's personality is affected by his actions, our sages were concerned that we might be adversely affected by the necessary but self-indulgent act of eating. Little by little, such acts can steep us ever more deeply in self-involvement, leading us in the direction of the horrible sins of Sodom. I never heard that before, but I was like, wow. So by washing our hands after we eat, we're actually being kind to ourselves and preventing our own spiritual blindness, as you know, because we don't have this salt anymore. So it's more of a spiritual concern now. In section number 9, Lot and his daughters, I called this kindness in spite of lack of trust. In this section, we learn of Lot's daughters and their lack of bitakun in Hashem to find them husbands and to help them build nations. Yet, even though they lacked this trust, Hashem used this act of depravity to pay Lot back measure for offering his daughters to the men of Sodom when they wanted the angels. I was like, wow, I never even realized that that was going on at the same time, this measure for measure portion. He did go into about how the oldest daughter was more depraved and the younger daughter was more concerned about the future. In the 10th vignette, the fountainhead of Jewish kingship, I subtitled this kindness in Teshuvah, and this kind of builds on the last one. This section took a closer look at the brazen act of the oldest of Lot's daughters. As in the previous section, it explained her brazenness. The question arises, why would Hashem allow her to be in the lineage of David, Hamelech, and the Messiah? What virtue did she possess that Hashem is rewarding for her for her like this? The answer is that we see in Lot's oldest daughter, and in Tamar, who, you know, Judah's daughter-in-law, and in Ruth, the descendant of Lot, the ultimate teshuvah for Hava, Eve's sin in the garden. Lot's daughter overcame the aspect of the Yetzer Hara of desire. Tamar overcame the aspect of the Yetzer Hara of jealousy, and Ruth overcame the aspect of the Yetzer Hara of pursuit of honor. These aspects are also correspond to the Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama. And because of what these three women did, they were able to atone for the or do teshuvah for the sin that Eve did in the garden. I was blown away. I was like, wow, that's so deep. But that just goes to show you that your descendants doing teshuvah can make a big difference. 11th section, Ruth fulfills the promise. And I call this kindness in relationships with Hashem. In this section, we learn that we make Hashem's will. When we make Hashem's will our will, he makes our will his will. This is shown in that Abraham made it his life's mission to live according to Hashem's will. Abraham wanted Lot to be a part of Hashem's plan. While Lot chose otherwise, his descendant Ruth chose Hashem. And thus through Ruth, Lot is included in Hashem's plan. And Hashem, it was in that way that Hashem made Abraham's will his will. I thought that was a pretty good example. In the 12th section, the testimony of the 7 sheep, kindness of evangelism. In this section, it was all about how Abimelech and Abraham were basically arguing over the wells. And so Abraham gave him the 7 sheep, which were branded with his brand, so that people would be able to understand that those wells belong to Abraham. And he points out very interestingly that when it come to Abraham and with Isaac, the whole issue with the wells was because Abraham and Isaac would draw people closer to Hashem with this water, because they offered it freely to anyone who came through. So that was a big deal, and Abraham wasn't going to stand by and just let them keep doing that. And the only way that the people could do anything about Abraham's wells was to ruin them by filling them with sand. Isaac's wells, it was like, God was like, he hadn't made that agreement with Abimelech that his father had. In the 13th section, it says plotting the course of life, and I subtitled this kindness and wisdom. In this section, the author starts off by explaining the difference between reacting to life and responding to life, the difference in letting life throw you around and making an effort to chart and plan your life in advance. He shows us that Abraham felt that his life was defined by where he spent the majority of it, and that was the overwhelming theme of Abraham's life was the connecting of his physical existence to his eternal one. Thus, when Abraham had lived in Beersheba 1 year longer than he had lived in Hebron, he moved back to Hebron. In advance, Abraham had charted out the definition and direction of his life's work, and he plotted his course accordingly. And I don't know about you guys, but this is a big deal for me, because in our house, we've got 3 teenagers and everybody wants to react instead of respond. And I keep trying to teach my kids that we need to react, we need to not react, we need to respond. In other words, think first and be careful with the things that you say and do when people are bothering you or irritating you or whatever. And if you think about it for a minute, Abraham, he was known for his kindness. Was it not, was not the person, okay, so the person who gets buffered about, they're going to be all frazzled and not necessarily inclined to be kind. But Abraham wasn't that way. It didn't matter what happened. He still was hospitable and selfless and kind. So by living intentionally, he was not off kilter when hardship came his way. He was still able to be kind and practice the selfless hospitality that he is known for. And I think that is actually the goal that we need to be shooting for, at least in my house. After these things is the section 14, and I subtitled it kindness in yirah and alacrity. So yirah is the awe of God, and alacrity is the being quick to do what is good. Once Abraham saw that all the pieces were together and in place for him to become the father of a nation, and this to him was signified by the getting the whole thing with the wells all squared away, because he had it established. right there. So they had a place to live, they had a water supply, he had an heir, everything was in place. So once everything was in place, Hashem, that Hashem had promised him, okay, so everything was in place and he could see what Hashem had promised him was possible now. Hashem asked Abraham to do the unimaginable and sacrifice his only son. It is Abraham's awe, the realization of one's own insignificance before Hashem's unfathomable greatness that drove Abraham. Without understanding Hashem's purpose, Abraham was prepared to do all Hashem asked of him without hesitation. And isn't that exactly what we are supposed to be doing? Isn't that how our focus is supposed to be, is God first? And you know, didn't the Messiah say that anybody who loves his mother or father or brother or sister more than me doesn't have a place with him, you know? And he said that our love for everybody else should look like hate when it comes to comparing that to our love to God. So I would say Abraham definitely had that one down pat. Number 15, the mountain of oneness, kindness of unity. This one was a very small section, and it said basically that the oneness of creation, this was really wild. The Temple Mount, the mountain that the temple sat on, the very base of that, the main stone, is what we're being taught is that the whole of earth came out of that stone. If you think about that for 1 minute, that the main stone, the foundation stone of the mountain, Mount Moriah, all the earth came from that. Talk about oneness. That's mind-blowing. Section 16 was the last section, and it's the providential horn. And I called this kindness is a two-way street. In this section, we see how Hashem has planned and prepared every detail that is Hashem's kindness to mankind, to care for us, even down to providing a ram at just the right time to be sacrificed. In our own lives, we need to start recognizing how Hashem has planned for everything. And we need to imitate our father Abraham in growing in our relationship with Hashem to the point that the only reality for us is that of fulfilling Hashem's will. That is the fastest I can go. And I'm sorry if it went too fast, but now it's time for Miss Batya to take over. So I'm going to mute my mic, and Miss Batya is going to take over with battle plans.
Wow, you did an excellent job, and I don't know how you covered that much material in that short a time. And I hope I can get through this chapter with as much clarity as you did. Thank you so much. And first, I want to apologize to everybody that I probably look a little, I feel a little haggard. We've been out of town all week. I took my husband to see his mother in Amarillo, who was in the hospital. And we literally, I wasn't even sure I was going to make it back. And so I texted Lee, I said, you start in case I'm not there, but I made it. So I love this book. Oh my gosh, I love this book so much. Battle plans. I love the title. You know, many times I have taught over the last couple of years that we are soldiers for Hashem. We're not to be laying up in the, you know, the luxury hotel, but we're down in the, what do you call them, foxholes, and we're to get down and dirty. And so I really, that was the first thing that attracted me to this book. The second thing was that this is our very first Mussar book to be written by women. And yay, so I'm very excited that, but they did base this book on the writings of the Maharal. Now, who in the world is the Maharal? You'll hear Amit mention him a lot. It actually stands for, you know, a lot of the rabbis have a shortened abbreviation for their name, and it actually stands for our teacher, Rabbi Lo. I guess that's how you say it, Lo or Lu. And he was a very important Talmudic sage and scholar in Prague, which is in Czechoslovakia or the Czech Republic, in the late 1500s and early 1600s. So just a little review. We may have people that are kind of new to Mussar, so I'm going to hit very, very brief high points. Mussar is the practice of refining one's character traits, and character traits are called midot. And we do that with in a very pragmatic way. We do journaling, we examine ourselves. Generally in Mussar, you pick one trait per week to work on, and you work on that trait all week, and then the next week you go to another trait. You don't have to master that trait. You just work on it for a week and then you move on. Some of the key words we've learned in Mussar, one is balance. Even a good trait can get out of balance. So we always are looking for the middle road. We're always looking for balance. One of the biggest obstacles, and you've probably already heard Leah mention this word a few times tonight, is the Yetzer Hara. It seems like the biggest obstacle. In fact, it just brought to mind a verse from Romans written by Shaul, who said, I don't understand what I'm doing, for I do not do what I want. Instead, I do what I hate. If I do what I don't want to do, I agree that the law is good. So he's going through this same struggle that we all do. I know what's good. Why am I not doing it? And it seems like that the Yetzer Hara is one of the obstacles to us knowing what is right, but not doing what is right. So what is this Yetzer Hara? In English, it would be the evil inclination. It's kind of like you've seen little commercials where you've got somebody's wanting a chocolate cake and he's got a good angel and an evil angel, and they're both arguing and telling him what to do. I guess that's a little bit of a way. Another way that some teachers look at it is that the Yetzer Hara comes from our animal physical needs. So the Yetzer Hara is not necessarily always bad. If we didn't have the Yetzer Hara, we wouldn't eat, we wouldn't procreate, we wouldn't do a lot of these, we wouldn't build homes for ourselves. And also, if without the Yetzer Hara, we wouldn't have free will. We would just be robots for Hashem. And that's not what Hashem wanted. He wanted us to have free will. And so we have to have the Yetzer Hara. So how do we then win over this Yetzer Hara? And that's what we get to learn. And they do it in the form of military strategy. And I love it. The first story in the book talks about the 6-day war that Israel won so soundingly over Egypt. And it says that Egypt easily could have won that battle. But what happened? What happened was that one bungling sergeant did not decode an incoming message, and therefore they did not know that this attack was about to happen. And so therefore Israel easily won this war. So it says here that the sergeant on duty in the decoding room attempted to decipher the red alert using the previous day's code, and his failure to properly decode the message led to catastrophe for his country. And in that same way, we cannot hope to win over the battle of the Yetzer Hara if we don't learn to decode the Yetzer Hara's messages to us. The Maharal starts his treatise on the power of the Yetzer Hara by breaking the code of the Yetzer Hara to us with this quote from Proverbs. If your enemy is hungry, give him bread. And if he is thirsty, pour out water for him to drink, because you'll be pouring out hot coals on his head, and Hashem will repay you. The enemy, according to the Maharal, is the Yetzer Hara. The enemy is always characterized by lack. If you get to feeling I'm lacking something in my life, that may be the Yetzer Hara speaking in your ear. It says here, the message of the Yetzer Hara is always, you don't have what you need. Maybe you're not married and you want to be married. Maybe you don't have a house and you just really want a home. I've heard so many of these from people I have spoken to even in the last month or so. And I just want to say, yes. But so in battle plan number 1 on page 21, if you're following in the book, battle plan number 1, we have to identify this voice of the Yetzer Hara. And when you hear that inner voice saying, or you begin to complain, I don't have blank. I'm not married. I'm not employed. I'm not educated enough. I don't have what I need, a lack of something, then you need to jump into action and say, put your battle gear on and say, this is the Yetzer Hara. This doesn't mean that you can't have legitimate wants. Many single people want to be married. Many people want to have homes and all of these things, and that's okay. But you cross the line, it says, and you start working for the enemy when you heed the Yetzer Hara's commands over Hashem. If Hashem has clearly pointed out to you that you're to remain single for now, or you're to remain, I'm sorry, Leah, in this certain place for right now, and you say, dang it, I'm gonna do it anyway. I don't care what Hashem says. Then you've crossed that line and you have lost the battle with the Yetzer Hara. Once you have cracked the code and you now recognize the voice of the Yetzer Hara, you can become aware of these messages, and then you can switch from intelligence to combat. And at the top of page 22, they give us a couple of weapons, G16 and the G17, 2 very important weapons to help us jump into battle when we hear the voice of the Yetzer Hara. The number 1 is the G16, and this is a phrase we need to memorize it. Put it on your mirror, wake up every day with this. Everything I need, I have, because Hashem has provided everything I need. If you get into a situation where you're scared, you're lacking, you're sad, you're depressed, just quote that. Everything I need, I have. And since I've been reading this book, I have been using this a lot. A bedrock belief in Hashem's goodness and kindness to you at this moment, whatever this moment is the best battle stance against the Yetzer Hara. And how do you achieve this? You achieve this by focusing your focus from what you don't have to what you do have. That's why they call it the G16. It's being grateful for what you do have. Many times in our studies over the last few years, we've talked about gratitude, and we've talked about gratitude journals and whatever it takes to shift your focus from what you don't have to what you do have. And they give us some examples, and probably I'll let you read most of them on your own. The first one, you may not be married yet, but you have many of the components to live a good life. You have friends, you have a job, you have a place to live. Look at those things. You may not have a pleasant job, but you get a paycheck every week. So look for the things that you do have. G17 is a little bit different weapon. It's a precision, they call it a precision missile. You know, Israel has weapons that can go right in the window of an apartment and take out a specific person. And that's what the G17 is. And what it does is it looks for the blessing in the lack itself. And this one hit me personally as I'm reading this book for the first time. And I turned to the page, to the bottom of page 23 and the top of page 24. I was just like, Lord, you gave me this book just for me. It says, you may not be healthy, but your illness may engender what you most want, a closer relationship with Hashem. Dr. Rahamim Melamed Cohen says that the years since he had Lou Gehrig's disease, and if you know, for you that don't know me, my husband has Lou Gehrig's disease, he says have become, and he's become completely paralyzed, have become the best years of his life because he's grown closer to Hashem than ever before. I just could, I had to go around and read this to everybody I know. I will say that for me and my husband, as we've had to go through this together, the blessing that I have sought out is that our relationship has grown into so much, so deep and intimate, more than we could have ever taken this relationship to without this horrible disease in our lives. So in every difficulty or lack you may be going through, there is a blessing hidden in there, and that's what the G17 is. So you've got the G16 for just general gratitude, and the G17, which is the precision weapon that says, what is the blessing in this situation right now? Again, everything I have, I need, because Hashem has provided everything I need. So the next thing that the Yetzer Hara does is he's a master of disguises. If he came in dressed in a silky red dress, we would recognize it right off and we would avoid it. But he doesn't do that. It says here that the Yetzer Hara seduces you into using the pleasure of physical reality to fill that empty space where you feel like something is lacking. So you've got some kind of a void in your life and it's got to be filled. And what do you fill that with? And unfortunately, many people try to fill that lack with something physical instead of Hashem, instead of something spiritual. And anytime we use something physical to fill that void, we are succumbing to the Yetzer Hara. And it goes on to tell us that that doesn't mean that in Judaism that everything physical is bad. Food is good. Judaism is all about enjoying what Hashem has given us. But we don't use those physical things to fill the void that is a spiritual void instead of Hashem. The next persona of the Yetzer Hara is called in our book Yitzra de Avodah Zarah. And this is in its extreme form. This would be the actual worship of a handmade idol. But most people don't do that these days. But they still can fall into this trap of the Yetzer Hara. We see some religions have statues in their places of worship and bow down to them and do things, say prayers to them. But in more subtle ways, it's sometimes easier to worship the created things than it is to worship the creator, because the creator is so big. It says here that if for us to get close to Hashem, we would need to make ourselves bigger. Parentheses, Mussar, work on yourself to get closer to Hashem. But it's easier, maybe, to make God smaller so that we can understand him and relate to him. But that's not what we're called to do. So sometimes people will fall into the trap of worshiping nature. Another trap that people fall into, what I call, is worshiping me God instead of my God. Me God is your ego, you trust in your abilities, you trust in what you can do. You don't need anything or anybody. So you are kind of making yourself a God. And this is another trap of the Yetzer Hara. You don't need anything else. You've got this, you can do this. So any act that glorifies and gives centrality to what is not God is a trap of the Yetzer Hara. And they list in our book that Lashon Hara, the evil tongue, is a form of this kind of trap of the Yetzer Hara, because when you speak evil of someone else, you're making yourself better or higher than they are. So you're kind of worshiping the me God instead of my God. So if we go back to the proverb that Maharal gave us at the very beginning, he talked about if you identify your enemy, you must give it bread. And in this next section, he says, he entitles it, when you identify your enemy, drag him to the Beit HaMidrash. It says, once you've identified your enemy, give him the bread of Torah, the water of spirituality. That, remember that space that you're lacking, that's that void, whatever that void is in your life, needs to be filled up with Hashem, with Torah, with spirituality. He goes on to say, if your enemy is stone, grind him down. If he's iron, blow him up. And we're going to look at this. Fulfilling a positive mitzvah. A positive mitzvah is when you have to get up and do something. And it should be relatively easy to get up and do what we need to do. But we are humans, and we're made from the earth. And you would pick up a rock. A rock doesn't move unless it is moved. It doesn't move in and of itself. And because we're connected to the earth, sometimes we tend to be the same way. We don't move unless some outside force is making us move. There's a cute story in here about Reb Arya, and this, I guess one of the authors is telling her children about this wonderful man who does all these things for other people. And she asks her children, don't you want to be like Reb Arya? And they go, nah, we just want a friend like Reb Arya. That's this, trap of the Yetzer Hara. Get somebody else to do it, instead of you having to do it yourself. But that's why he calls this the stone. This enemy is the stone. And what did he say? If it's a stone, grind it down. So how do you grind it down? He also talks about despair, interestingly enough, also can render us like stone. If you get despair, sometimes you get paralyzed. And that's another way that you feel like you just can't do anything. You're overwhelmed. You're, for whatever reason, and it says here, this is always a consequence of having lost faith in Hashem. And I underlined that one several times because we all get to that place at some point in our life. He says the Yetzer Hara of despair, or the other one, can be fought by grinding it down. And this means these positive actions that you need to be taken. If you can't take them all at once, break it down into the smallest step and take the smallest step that you feel like that you can take. But take some kind of positive action to fight against this Yetzer Hara telling you just don't move at all. So battle plan number 3 on the bottom of page 28, grind down that Yetzer Hara. The way to battle the Yetzer Hara that is like stone is to grind it down. Take small, even minute steps to fulfill a positive mitzvah. And for people that are new that might be listening, a mitzvah is a good deed or a positive commandment in which Hashem has told us to do something, not to refrain from doing something, but to do something. Keep Shabbat, for example. One example it gives us is maybe you feel like you should be hosting big Shabbat meals, and you're just like overwhelmed. I can't do that. Have one person over and start with the smallest step. So what if the Yetzer Hara is attacking with iron? This relates to the negative mitzvah, the things that we are to refrain from. And a very interesting, I had to think about this statement in the book for a bit, but think about it, especially with children or even older people. Destruction can be as pleasurable as creation. You see a child build up his blocks, and the next thing he wants to do is just knock them all down. And that can be as satisfying to him as the creating of the tower with his blocks. And it says the Gemara states that the Yetzer Hara of iron, of destructive tendencies, must be exploded by how? Dragging it to the Beit HaMikdash. He says, learn Torah to fill that empty space. The feelings of pleasure and empowerment that come from destruction can be replaced by the pleasure and empowerment that come from learning and incorporating Torah into our lives. So you got an empty space in there, fill it with some Torah learning. The Yetzer hara of iron, of destruction. He talks about a father who's been rather harsh with his daughter all her life. She goes to see him and he's continuing to be harsh, and she's wanting to react instead of respond. But then she remembers this, what she's been learning. And so some Torah learning pops into her brain, and she remembers, honor your parents. And so she can take that Torah learning that she's been learning and turn that Yetzer Hara basically on its head. It said another great way to blow up the Yetzer Hara of iron is to blow up the illusions that it fosters. And I loved this couple of examples that they gave. One was, and you start reading the story and you think, well, this is a good thing. A person has a friend who's ill and she wants to take her some soothing music. So she decides to pop in a CD into her, whatever, and copy a CD that she already has and take it over to her. That seems like a good and positive thing. But then she remembers, wait a minute, this is stealing. This is not legal. It gives us another example of a Zadik, Leib Yaakov, who went to some event and they had some, I think it was I don't know if it was the Benchers or some little booklet that he was really liking. And he started to just put a few of them in his pocket. But then he said out loud to himself, this is stealing. And so he goes and talks to the guy that's doing the event, and the guy gives him some. So one of the best ways to blow up this Yetzer Hara of iron is to call it out. Say what it is. Call sin, sin. Call wrong, wrong. So battle plan number 4, bottom of page 31, requires exploding the illusions fostered by the Yetzer Hara by cutting through rationalizations and calling sins what they are. And we can only do this if we know what sin is. And that, again, so we have to learn Torah to know what is right and what is wrong. He gives some examples on the top. If you tell your children instead of calling it, when you yell at your children, instead of calling it discipline, call it what it is, hurting other people with words. When you complain about a neighbor, instead of calling it constructive, call it what it is, Lashon Hara. So don't let the Yetzer Hara let you rationalize that something is not sin when it really is. So then he talks some more about how this learning Torah will work as we battle the Yetzer Hara. He says this is our most indispensable weapon to vanquish the Yetzer Hara because we need to fill those empty void spaces with what is holy, with Torah. He says the bread of Torah fills the empty spaces and will satisfy the sense of lack. And that's what defeats the Yetzer Hara. There's check my time here. There's a story here. I'll let y'all read it on the top of page 33 about a woman who was basically secular and moved to Jerusalem, moved to one of the kibbutzes. But eventually she does stay and learn at a yeshiva, and her whole life is turned around. So I'll let y'all read that story there. But Torah will change you. The Maharal continues by explaining how the Torah fills the empty spaces. And this is great. When a person is actually learning Torah, at that moment, he is comparable to the angels. And if you're in an angelic-like state, then first of all, you're closer to Hashem, you're more aware of Hashem, and less likely to be listening to the voice of the Yetzer Hara. It says that when a person is in that state, he is far, very far above the place of lack, the breeding ground of the Yetzer Hara. So the closer you are to Hashem, the less you'll feel that void that was so important just a day or two ago. He also talks, and I'll probably let you read that on your own, but he talks about the difference of just learning Torah and learning Torah to change you, basically. Learning Torah to be a better person, to be a more spiritual person. And I sometimes, in promoting our Mussar classes, I have talked to some who are very, very learned in Torah. But as I tell them, I tease them, and I say, this is great, but if you go home and you treat your wife harshly, what have you really learned? Yes, you know a lot of facts, you know a lot of deep teachings, but Mussar helps you put that into practice. And so, which is one reason I really like Torah. And another reason I really think it's going to be good for our children, because Deborah and I have been finding out they know a lot of Torah. But then when you question them on a practical basis, sometimes it's questionable. How do we put this into practice? It says here, the Maharal does, Torah takes us above the human observation of just learning to a place that is absolutely pure and objective. When a person enters that place, the infinitude of the Torah can fill any empty space. But we have to study Torah for pure motives, not because we want to be smarter than the other guy or because we're going to get some reward, but just because we love the Torah so much. You know, the Torah really is the only thing that is perfect and can fill that lack perfectly. It's the only thing that can make us complete, and take away that feeling that there's just something missing. Hashem is perfect, and the perfection it talks about even of the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, is real because it brought Hashem's presence into this world. So anything that we do, studying Torah, if we could be in the Beit HaMikdash, that brings us closer to Hashem, is how we overcome the Yetzer Hara. Said here, this is sad. Historically, when masses of Jews have abandoned Torah, we have felt the pain of the empty space, and we have sought to fill it with other things. Those things seemed to work for a while, but in the end, they left nothing but disillusionment. Many of the early communists were Jews. They were enamored of the prospect of social justice for all. The secular Zionists clung to the ideology of building up the land, Jewish labor, as a way to fill that empty space. But the act of draining the swamps and building the roads didn't fill that empty space. That's why the same Zionists who built the land are now in the process of destroying it. So anytime we look to fill that space with something physical, it's just going to create a greater need of lack, or a greater need of, the space is going to get bigger. So battle plan number 5, which is our last one for tonight, in this first chapter, battle plan number 5, learn Torah, dragging the Yetzer Hara to the Beit HaMikdash. Now, this can mean something a little bit differently for men, it says, than it might for women. For men, you know, be at the Beit Midrash, study with others, get with a study group. And I think I read, I've been real busy this week, but I think Amet's going to start having a once a month Shabbat afternoon Torah study. I think that's probably going to be on Zoom, but it also will be local. It will be at the shul. And so for those that are local, it's good to study with others, not just by yourself at home. Now, for women, though, what does this mean? How can, you know, how do we put Torah learning into practice? We build our home. We build our Torah home. We light Shabbat candles. We shop for kosher groceries. We teach our children. It even goes on to say, and I liked all of these, listening to teachings. It says CDs, but most of us listen to YouTubes and streaming teachings. But it also said, I like this one, not only learn, but teach. You know, the best way you can learn anything is this true, Leah? Is to have to teach it. If somebody says, here, go teach this, I mean, you begin to learn real quick.
Yes, you do.
So I like this where it says, how can a woman bring the Beit Hamidrash into her home? By recalling what she learns and consciously living it out. When faced with a decision, she can ask, what is the Torah's position on this? Learning Torah protects against both chronic and acute attacks of the Yetzer Hara. Torah protects from that attacks of the Yetzer Hara. All right, I made it. That's chapter 1, and I'm more excited about chapter 2 because it's already speaking to me. I've already read ahead, and I can't wait till next week. So if you don't have the book, get the book and enjoy this book. So do we want to allow people to ask questions?
If there's anyone who has a question, you can go ahead and unmute your mic and go ahead and ask. Just remember, this is being recorded.
Or comments or anything you have.
Yes.
Did we put y'all all to sleep?
I think so. I don't know.
I don't have a question, but I think I'm going to enjoy these books very much.
Very good. Yeah.
I like how they all went together. It's like some of the things I was learning about in the one book, Miss Batya just talked about, and I was like, wow, okay. Go fancy that. All
I
right.
read ahead. Excuse me. I read ahead on the battle plans. Oh, it's a wonderful book. I've read about half of it.
Oh wow, you're ahead of
I
me.
enjoyed it so much. That's good stuff.
It
It
is.
is good stuff.
It's amazing. I've been teaching Mussar, gosh, I don't know, 3 or 4, maybe Hadass remembers years.
No, you've been, several years.
And
Long time.
the whole time.
Yay.
I don't know how the book comes about that we just determined to study next, but every time I open it, I'm like, oh my, this is exactly for me.
Yeah. All right. Well, if there's no more questions or comments, then we're going to go ahead and end the recording. And we will see you all next week at the same time, 7 Central. And I guess it's 8 Eastern. And then we'll be doing chapter 2 of Battle Plans. And what's the next parasha called? I've got it right here.
Oh, it's mine.
Parasha
Sarah.
Chaye Sarah.
It's my birthday portion.
Well, happy birthday early.
Yeah, it's coming.
From what I could observe, it seemed like they were a little bit shorter next week. So, but anyways, thank you everybody for coming, and I'm gonna stop the recording.